Hello, today I'm going to talk about insight in the context of personal development. I'll describe how it can be useful, but how it also has limitations. More than that, I'll describe how sometimes insight can be a trap or an obstacle to our growth. You might wonder, how could that be? How could insight be anything but a good thing? Join me and stay until the end, and I'll describe several insight traps. If you haven't been here before, my name is Michael Dewan Herrick. I'm a psychotherapist and a life coach in private practice in London. I talk about topics relevant to therapy, coaching, and personal development. I also have created a playlist under the title Questioning Woke Psychotherapy. Let's start with a working definition of insight. Having read many definitions, I'll offer an amalgam. As the word suggests, it is to look deeply into something and gain an understanding of it. This could be through analysis, reflection, or intuition. What we're looking into could be ourselves, other people, an idea, how things work, or the greater world. Our insights often include an understanding of cause and effect relationships. In the context of personal development, there's an emphasis on self-understanding. The ideas that I will share about this have come out of my observations and experiences as a therapist and a life coach over many years, but also my personal experience. My clients often ask themselves, and me, why am I the way that I am? Why do I feel what I feel? Why do I have these thoughts? Why do I do the things I do or resist doing the things I know I need to do? Clients also ask these same questions about other significant people in their lives, like partners, parents, their children, friends, coworkers, and bosses. These are important questions and often set part of the agenda for our work. We explore these questions together, searching for answers that can become insights. The first reflections are usually about the client's current situation. Questions revolve around how they feel, what they think, and how they're responding to what is currently happening in their lives. Simply clarifying and articulating answers to these questions establishes some base of self-awareness or insight about oneself. This is tremendously valuable. It gives us something to work with. At some point, the nature of the questions shift to a deeper level. Beyond becoming more aware of how they currently are, they want to know how they got that way. Sometimes I initiate and encourage this kind of curiosity, but often clients are keen to explore this themselves. They're also curious about how and why others are the way they are. Asking, how did I get this way, inevitably leads to an historical inquiry into childhood and whatever significant events may have been formative. This includes relationships with parents, siblings, peers, and other adults in one's extended family. Maybe there are other important people like teachers or neighbors or their friends' parents. Other formative events might involve childhood illnesses or accidents, divorce, family relocation, bullying, neglect, or trauma from various forms of abuse. As stories get told and old emotions are triggered, there's a need to make sense of it all. These raw stories need to be interpreted to gain insight about the impact of such events on the developing self at the time and how this is still playing itself out in adulthood. This is where therapists often apply various interpretive frameworks, such as psychoanalytic or psychodynamic theory, object relations, attachment theory, or trauma theory. Might also offer tools for making sense of the impact of early childhood experiences. Whatever the story or interpretation, a therapist can help to set it in the context of the way human beings are made and what we need to develop in a healthy, functioning way. Given this, many of one's latter struggles in life can be traced back to not having our early developmental needs met. For instance, for safety, attention, stimulation, comforting, and a secure attachment relationship. Our tendency to get triggered into negative emotions, hold certain beliefs about ourselves and others, and behave in problematic ways can be understood as something we learned to feel, think, and do to survive once upon a time when our needs were not being met. Most people don't immediately recognize the connection between their history and their current issues. In time, many do. This is the dawning of insight. Instead of being embedded in and identified with one's emotions, beliefs, and behavior, through examination and reflection, These have been made an object of our curiosity. One of the first consequences of this can be a reduction in the experience of shame. Instead of a story about oneself that is based on the idea that there's something wrong with me, there's a news story. The news story says, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with me. Once upon a time when I was an innocent, dependent, and powerless child, I was neglected or exposed to adverse experiences that had had an impact on me. I did the best I could to cope and survive and develop certain habits that are now problematic. This is good. This is all good. This is a primary value of gaining insight through an exploration of personal history. It also establishes a ground for shifting our curiosity in another direction. Now that we have some insight about how we became the way we are, we can begin to ask what we can do about it. What might we need to do to regulate our emotions when they are triggered and we become distressed, instead of suppressing them or acting them out? How might we question old beliefs and adopt a more flexible and functional way of thinking? How might we alter our behavior to avoid predictable negative consequences and move toward a more desirable way of living? The answers to these questions are further insights about what to do next. When they are put into practice, life begins to get better. This is a very general sketch of the value of insight when it comes to personal development. You can see, as perhaps you already knew, that this can mark a profoundly positive shift in a person's life. At the same time, there are roadblocks and detours at every threshold. If we get past the resistance to examining earlier experiences, there can be a refusal to acknowledge the impact of adverse experiences and a stubborn clinging to the "I'm bad" story. And if the impact is acknowledged, there can be a resistance or inability to glean further insight about it that might provide a path forward. If you're liking this video so far, please give it a like. And if you aren't already a subscriber, please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. I generally put out a video every week, usually on Saturdays. All right, back to our topic. Now, I want to talk about some of the traps of insight. Here's the first one. Beyond the earlier roadblocks just mentioned, insight can be acknowledged, but somehow it's never enough. This is common in my experience. Months of exploration, even years, can be done, and plausible answers to the question, why am I like this, can be repeatedly identified and discussed. Yet, it is as if the client still has no clue. The question persists. After I had seen this happen many times, I became curious about what was going on. There could be many reasons for it. Maybe we hadn't sufficiently plumbed the depths, and the insights that had arisen simply hadn't addressed something further down and more central that could better answer that question. I maintain that that's always possible. However, I have another theory. It seems to me that many people hold on to some hope that there's an answer to their question, some explanation for why they are the way they are, that if they just knew this for certain, their problems would somehow evaporate, dissolve, and resolve themselves. Just maybe, if that could happen, they wouldn't have to figure anything else out or do anything difficult or scary. They wouldn't have to decide on a life direction, cultivate new habits and disciplines, take a chance at trusting someone, or rouse the courage to set boundaries in their relationships. With this magical insight, negative emotions would not occur. Even though it may be true that some insights may be insufficient, it also seems true to me that the endless seeking of that magical insight is a way to avoid contending with life. This is one of the traps of insight. It's not so much about the insight itself, but the endless pursuit of insight without exploring its implications or putting it to use. I think of it like amassing fuel, but never putting it in a vehicle and going anywhere. As important as fuel is, it has little value if not used. It's also my opinion that some forms of therapy and some therapists get stuck in this very trap. Endless, repetitive analysis of one's relationship with one's mother, countless dream interpretations, descriptions of insecure attachment styles in the context of different relationships, the origins of catastrophic thinking, fear of abandonment. All of these things are important and potentially valuable to explore and distill insights from. But in my opinion, this is not enough. We can ask, what is the value of insights if one's life has gotten no better? Is it enough just to know things and impress others with how smart and clever we are? While this may be sufficient for some people, I don't think it is sufficient for psychotherapy. Many psychoanalysts, I'm not saying all of them, have had long and lucrative careers endlessly pursuing that magical insight with clients. But I'm sorry, much of it has been a waste of money and time. It can be gratifying for therapists to offer or even facilitate the dawning of insight in their clients. This isn't necessarily a problem unless that gratification eclipses the fundamental purpose of therapy. And let me be so bold as to declare that the purpose to be to help clients make their lives better in some way on their own terms. If that is not happening, then therapy is not working. I have a respect and appreciation for most forms of therapy when done well, and I'm informed by many, including psychoanalysis. But in the context of what I'm saying about insight, I have a special fondness for acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. There isn't time now to say much about it, so I'll comment only briefly. ACT also facilitates insight, but it puts emphasis on action, thus ACT. Insight isn't expected to make anything easy. There is encouragement to accept that life is difficult, that despite insight, we will feel all sorts of things and get pulled in all kinds of directions. But we can identify and commit to our own values and goals and do what is necessary to embody and pursue them. Another way to say this is that for insight to have real value, it needs to be joined with praxis or practice. The second trap of insight is the belief that knowing something means that one has changed in some significant way. Instead of an endless pursuit of insight, we think that having an insight stands in for embodying and manifesting its implications. This works about as well as quenching one's thirst by thinking about water. We can boost our self-esteem by believing that we are virtuous because we have virtuous thoughts and say virtuous words. We can deconstruct our self-limiting beliefs and replace them with the belief that we're free to become or accomplish whatever we set our minds to, and then set our minds on nothing in particular and do nothing. We can imagine the great things we are capable of, but not put in any work. We can be like diners in a restaurant, savoring the thought of the food on the menu, but we can't be bothered to choose something, order, and eat it. The third trap of insight can happen when we discover how we were impacted by adverse early childhood experiences or even adverse experiences later in life. Now we understand why we are so afraid of life and people, why we behave in self-destructive ways, and why we sabotage our relationships, goals, and everything else. It's clear now, with insight, that we are not to blame. We can settle into a victim's identity and make a career out of complaining. We can dispense with shame and replace it with resentment. The fourth trap is that we can take an insight about ourselves and have a fixed mindset about it. After much exploration of past events, we can think, I am this way because these things have happened to me. We can believe that because it has been true so far, it will always be true. This, instead of setting out to see how and to what degree we might be able to change and grow. In other words, we don't adopt a growth mindset. Finally, the fifth trap of insight is when we latch onto one insight and give it excessive explanatory power. We begin to see and interpret everything through a predominant frame. It may be true, but it's partial. We become so fascinated and enamored with our newfound insight that we try to explain everything through it and use it to determine our behavior. This instead of cultivating insights from different perspectives. Sometimes multiple perspectives will be paradoxical and seem to contradict each other. Then we have the challenge of deciding where each one best applies for addressing a variety of questions and integrating our diverse insights for an optimal overall understanding, problem solving, and functioning. Over-reliance on a single insight happens all the time. Here are just a few examples. We can gain some understanding about ourselves, like, I have an anxious attachment style. Then we interpret every difficulty in trusting people as a failure caused by this problem. We might apply this even when it's premature or unwise to trust someone. Or we can have the insight that we neglect our own needs and are a people pleaser. Then we neglect the legitimate needs of others and refuse to take any responsibility for maintaining relationships. Or we have an insight about the importance of unconditional positive self-regard and self-compassion and interpret any feeling of guilt as something to ignore and overcome. My focus in this video has been the relevance of insight to personal development. I've suggested its value, its limits, and 5 of its potential traps. As I mentioned in the beginning, I also have a playlist where I question woke psychotherapy. So I want to make just a few comments about some insight traps I see within the woke movement. These have to do with the last trap I described, where a valid insight is overemphasized to the neglect of other things that are also true. For instance, the insight that hierarchical relationships can be oppressive leads to seeing oppressive power everywhere in every hierarchy. Add this to the insight that social norms are socially constructed, and you get a hypervigilance for an oppressive power structure in every norm so that it can be deconstructed. Take the insight that some social inequalities are due to systemic prejudice and assume that all inequalities are due to systemic injustice. Take the insight that gender stereotypes are cultural constructions and conclude that sex is fluid, not binary, and individuals can decide for themselves what sex they are. These are just a few examples. Each one is based on a legitimate insight, but that insight is used to draw faulty conclusions because it is not mediated by other things that are also true. The woke, however, well understand the value of insight is only realized through praxis. They don't just have interesting thoughts and theories. They are determined to change the world so that it will accord with their insights. I talk about this extensively in my playlist titled Questioning Woke Psychotherapy, if you're interested to hear more. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. I hope you'll join me again. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other. So long.